Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinar. We're all happy to be here. And this morning's theme is working age dementia diagnosis. We've got a varied panel to help with the webinar, and I shall introduce them shortly. I'd just like to remind you that these webinars are designed, produced and presented by people living with dementia. All of us here, with the exception of our behind the screen man, James, are living with dementia. These webinars rely on you. We need your comments, responses and questions via the text boxes you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Please use the text boxes to ask questions as well. If you raise your hand, we won't be able to see you. The text boxes will be monitored for questions, so we will be able to respond to some as we go along. It would be nice also if in the chat box you could just say who you are, where you're from and what you do. That's probably because I'm nosy, but it's nice to know sometimes who our audience is. I'm going to start off by giving you some background information about dementia and the working age diagnosis. And then Martina is going to speak to us, and I'll let Martina introduce herself. And then Sheila Robinson will be speaking to us. They're both wonderful ladies, and I know they've got a lot to say. So, and then we'll have questions maybe as we go through, but we won't interrupt the speakers when they're speaking to ask questions. We wait until they finish speaking, or maybe at the end. So I've looked up some facts and figures, which have shocked me, to be honest with you. And the first thing I want to say is that the prevalence of young onset dementia, an estimated 7.5% or 70,800 of the estimated 944,000 people living with dementia in the UK are living with young onset dementia. And this is where symptoms occurred under the age of 65. The estimated prevalence figure for young onset dementia, where diagnosis was between age 30 to 64, is 92%. That's 100,000 of the general population. It's scary, isn't it? Prevalence rates for young onset dementia in Black and minority ethnic groups are higher than for the population as a whole. People from BAME backgrounds are less likely to receive a diagnosis or support. And people with a learning disability are at a greater risk of developing dementia at a younger age. On average, a person may see between 2 and 5 different consultants before they even get a diagnosis of dementia. The average time to diagnose somebody in the younger people age group is 4.4 years. That's compared to taking 2.2 years for people aged over 65. And I think that's largely because people say, and I've had it said to me, you can't possibly have dementia, you're too young. So those figures are quite scary, really. And I just want to say something about the importance of language. The language used to talk about dementia can strongly influence how others treat or view us and how we feel about ourselves. For example, referring to people with dementia as sufferers or as victims implies that we are helpless. This not only strips us of our dignity and self-esteem, it reinforces inaccurate stereotypes and heightens the fear and stigma surrounding dementia. Young onset dementia is not necessarily the defining aspect of someone's identity. We are a person first, and we should always be described and treated as such. Life does not stop for us when dementia starts. Using the correct term avoids confusion. There's many different forms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is just one of them, and the terms are not interchangeable. You might have 2 people diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and yet their symptoms can be very different. Young onset dementia is a preferable term to early onset dementia, so as to avoid confusion with the early stages of dementia generally. People in the early stages of dementia who are still working may have difficulties with concentration and orientation, may find simple work tasks more difficult. We may make uncharacteristic mistakes, and we may have problems with communicating, such as finding the right words. This may result in distress, embarrassment, and a loss of confidence. An added complication is that younger people are more likely to have a rarer form of dementia that has different symptoms from the most common types. For example, changes to our personality, behavior, and social functioning, rather than memory. This can result in a delay in diagnosis and in the person getting the support that they need to keep working. As a small bit about employment rights in young onset dementia. Employers may wrongly assume that the changes in our behavior, productivity, or performance are intentional or controllable. And as a result, they may start a performance management process, and in some cases, even terminate the person's employment. However, dementia is classified in England, Wales, and Scotland as a disability in the Equality Act of 2010 and the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995 in Northern Ireland. This means a person with a diagnosis has a legal protection from discrimination at work. To ensure the person's rights are recognised, it's advisable for them to talk to their employer soon after their diagnosis. If they feel uncomfortable talking to their immediate manager, maybe they can speak to their human resources manager. There are some occupations that legally require the person with dementia to disclose their diagnosis. Some of these occupations are armed forces, healthcare professions, jobs that involve operating dangerous machinery, and jobs that involve driving. If a person believes they've been discriminated against because of their dementia, they should first talk to their employer or human resources manager to try to resolve the issue informally. Also put in your concerns in writing. All employers should have a written complaints policy. If the issue cannot be resolved informally, the person should follow the steps in the policy to escalate their complaint. The other thing, and this is something I knew nothing about when I lost my job, is adjustments in the workplace. When an employer is made aware of the person's dementia diagnosis, they should arrange an occupational health assessment to identify the support the person may need to help you to continue to work. An employment action plan should then be made with a person's full involvement. Some possible reasonable adjustments to make working life easier may include the following: allocating tasks individually rather than all at once. I struggle with multitasking. That's a good one for me. Giving advice on simplifying routines. Providing a quieter workspace with fewer distractions. Enabling supported home working. Offering regular rest breaks throughout the day. Providing assistive technology, for example, alerts, reminders, voice recognition software. Setting up a buddy scheme and regular support sessions. Reduced hours if needed or requested. And also move into a role with less responsibility if needed or requested. It may be helpful for the person with the diagnosis of dementia to tell immediate colleagues, as this may lead to them being more understanding and supportive. That's a very personal choice, that is. So, it's up to us as individuals to decide whether or not we do tell our immediate work colleagues. So that's just a brief introduction about some of the problems with young onset dementia and getting a diagnosis. And without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Martina Davis. And Martina was in the process of setting up her own business when she received her dementia diagnosis. And she's going to talk to us about that. So over to you, Martina.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. Good morning, everyone. My name's Martina, as you've just heard, and I'm delighted to be here to talk a little bit about how a working age diagnosis has affected and changed my life. I was actually diagnosed with something called PCA, which is posterior cortical atrophy. And it's a dementia which affects the back of the brain and is quite difficult to diagnose. And the initial process that people generally go through is to send people to the ophthalmologist or opticians, anything like that, because people think it's to do with sight, and it isn't. It's actually to do with what's called brain sight. It affects spatial awareness. There's a time lag when sometimes how you see things visually and how things manifest themselves in terms of it could be a second or 2 seconds before you can actually see the object that you're looking for. So that's a little bit about that side of my diagnosis. Now, as Chris said, I was setting up a business, but I've been self-employed virtually all of my working life, and I've gained a large number of skills along the way. I had endless ambitions and dreams, and was working towards what I considered to be my final business, which would take me through my later working life, retirement. And because of the nature of the business, I was looking forward to be able to potter on, if you like, beyond retirement. But as the old saying goes, the best laid plans of mice and men. What I never dreamt of in a million years was being faced with a dementia diagnosis, and certainly not at my age, a working age, let alone a working age. And the impact on my working life from the symptoms and the actual diagnosis was staggering, which interestingly was less to do with the acceptance of the diagnosis. And it was actually almost a relief to have some idea of what was wrong. But it had more to do with facing the reality of coming to terms with the impact of those symptoms and diagnosis, what it had, and how it would become impossible to carry on working following the direction, the business I'd given myself to do. And I also knew that the financial and emotional impact was going to be absolutely devastating. So I'd like to start painting this blank canvas for you so you can start to get some idea of why this working age diagnosis had such an impact on me. I've been lucky. I've been given the lucky break as a self-taught photographer and worked hard at bringing all the skills I'd acquired previously to my ultimate business dream, which was to open a gallery for local artists to exhibit and sell their works. And it was a passion I'd had for absolutely years. I guess I've always enjoyed being in the cut and thrust of things, and I ran all aspects of the business single-handedly, immersing myself totally from using experience from my previous accounting business to creatively hanging exhibitions, writing artist bios, designing my website, along with marketing materials, et al. And I've always been proactive, and never more so than trying to make this dream a reality. Now, this might seem odd, but at the same time, my 18-year-old rescue dog Daisy was also diagnosed with doggy dementia. And I can clearly remember saying to her, "It's all girls together nowadays." So how did my working age diagnosis affect me? Well, firstly, emotionally, the isolation and the loneliness were the first major factors that kicked in as I realized that, you know, life would never, ever be the same again. You know, for example, and I should have questioned this next bit more, and I didn't. I noticed I was struggling to write with my left hand. And forever the optimist, because I'm a glass half full girl, always have been, always will be. I thought, well, God gave me 2 hands, so I taught myself to write with my right hand. And I didn't really think about it at the time, because I kind of thought, well, the impact is more of a nuisance value. So as time marched on, I found the part of my brain that dealt with figures, numbers, calculations was not functioning as it should. And I was no longer the queen of spreadsheets. I was fast becoming the queen of scream, as I frustratingly pushed myself to understand why. Why couldn't I do this anymore? What was wrong with me? Why when anybody else had to get a calculator out, could I work stuff out in my head before they'd finished working it out on a calculator? All that had gone. You know, what's 1 and 1 these days? 3. Well, not literally, but that's how I felt at the time. And amongst other things, I'd become clumsy. And as a major part of my job was constantly being up a 7-step ladder, because it was a beautiful big old Georgian building, absolutely fabulous in the old part of Carlisle, by the castle, I became known as Dangerous Doris. For obvious reasons, I was either falling off the ladder, missing the steps, constantly found on the floor looking for glasses, looking for anything. I was just, honestly, you've no idea. Anyway, swiftly moving on. Secondly, financially, I knew I was never going to be in the financial position I'd forward planned for with my gallery, which was to be my last business. This also took its toll as I came to terms with the financial impact of my working age diagnosis, and it was devastating. Now, another thing I hadn't accounted for was the personal impact I felt from other people's reactions. And I don't know whether they're scared, I don't know whether they're just being rude, and I don't know whether they just don't care. But one of the ones that impacted me greatly, because I started to wonder, is this how I was going to be seen with a dementia diagnosis? I was asked, had I been found wandering in my PJs at night then? And the person that asked me that clearly had a weird sense of humour, because judging by his laughter, he thought it was absolutely hilarious. And I was standing there with all my dignity in place and actually having a conversation with myself saying, you ignorant pig, you know, you're not asking anything, you're just being rude. Someone else I consider as a bomb-proof friend turned tail, firmly slamming the door behind her. Some people were becoming frustrated with me, even though they knew I had a diagnosis, and was constantly asking, what's the matter with you? You used to do this, turning on a sixpence. Closer to home, things had an irreparable financial and emotional impact, which I would prefer not to go into. I'm sure everybody understands. An obvious question that comes into anyone's head when they don't have children is being looked after about when you get older. I know it's not a requirement of the kids, but you'd like to think they'll be there for you and for truth told, many are. Recently, I saw firsthand something that made me greatly appreciative of how I'm managing things and what I'm planning for the future, because the impact on me of their behaviour was a real wake-up call. And without going into too much detail, 3 middle-aged working adults saw that their mother, over the course of time, was unwell, and were often heard shouting, "You're losing the plot, you've got dementia." And despite her having several falls where she ended up in hospital, she received very little to no care from them, leaving her to rattle around a large house at night. As she became more frustrated, the family appeared to care less and less, and eventually she was sectioned. She then became physically unwell and was taken to hospital, where she died. I no longer think about the what ifs. And yes, the impact on me with my working age diagnosis will never go away. And the experience of this lady has reminded me that all that glitters certainly is not gold, that every situation is different. So how do I deal with my working age diagnosis? Well, I've done a Martina. I've learned to ditch what I can't do, and I concentrate and build on what I can. I'm still Martina, and I continue to work on my ability to be proactive in whatever I can reasonably get involved with. I continue to learn about myself and acknowledge my capabilities, and hope that as I learn more about me and my diagnosis, that others will be kind and do the same. I no longer mourn in the same way the loss of my abilities and my business. And when I had to let my business go, one of the artists said to me, "You created a great memory and a legacy." And when that loneliness and isolation hit, I faced them in the most positive way I can. In other words, I've learned to live my best life despite my working age diagnosis, because after all, life is not a rehearsal.
That was wonderful, Martina. Thank you so much. You gave a really clear explanation, an understanding of what it's like to be diagnosed with young onset dementia. And I can think of a few questions, but I think we probably go through the speakers and then I may ask questions at the end. And that was wonderful, thank you. And I'd like to do some photography. Maybe you and I can have a little chat sometime. Nigel, if you've popped up, have you got a question to ask?
No, I haven't. I'm just going to give some feedback to Martina. There's lots of love out there for you, Martina, from things you've just said. Lots of people very complimentary and thanking you very much for sharing your experiences and wishing you well for the future. Teresa Greenway says, "Thank you, Martina. You're inspirational and your courage and strength shines through." Liz Mann says, "That was wonderful and I love your positivity." Kate Fellows so clearly expressed. Thank you, Martina. Nia Jones says, "Totally agree with you. Thank you so much, Martina." They're all there for you to see for yourself, but there's a lot of love out there for you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for that. It really, it's got me there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to know that you're saying the right things. And I think, you know, like you all, when you're speaking, you don't know if you're saying the right things or you don't know if you're saying what people want to hear, but clearly you were. So thank you very much, Martina. And I'm sure we'll come back to you. The next speaker to join us this morning is the very, very lovely Sheila Robinson, who I've known for quite a long time. Sheila has always got pearls of wisdom to share with us all. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sheila, and she's going to tell us her story around young onset dementia. So good morning, Sheila. Thank you.
Good morning.
It's over to you.
My story is a little unusual, but I think there are still things to be learned from it. At the time I was diagnosed, I was working as a counsellor in an occupational health team. And I immediately offered my resignation. And the doctors, you know, the senior doctors in the practice simply refused to accept it. They said that they got feedback forms from all the people that I saw, and they would tell me when I couldn't work anymore on the basis of those feedback forms. And they also put into practice extra support for me. They paid for me to have extra supervision. All counsellors are required to have an independent supervisor, and they agreed to have more contact with her. Normally, that your supervisor would only get in touch with your employers if there was a real reason, an ethical reason why you shouldn't be working. But we agreed that if she had any concerns at all, she could get in touch with them. So I had absolutely the opposite of Martina. I felt completely supported by the people I was working for. They really could not have done more. We mutually agreed that I should do a bit less work because, quite honestly, I was doing far too much. So they stopped giving me extra clients every week. And I was quite glad of that. I was glad to cut down a little bit, but I carried on working with that support for about 3 years. And indeed, the only reason I stopped was A, because I was doing so much for the Alzheimer's Society, and B, because my husband's health was poor. I think what we as a society need to get over to people is that we still are able to do things when we're diagnosed with dementia, but the will to give us support is necessary. And we can do a lot, I think, in an educational way, in saying that a diagnosis of dementia isn't the end of our ability to work, or the end of our ability to be the person we always were. I'm still Sheila. I'm still all the things that I used to be. And the fact that I've got dementia is quite low down on my list of who I am. If you ask me who I am, I would say I'm a woman of faith, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a poet, I'm this, I'm part of my community. The fact that I'm a person with dementia is very low down on who I think I am. And I think we should encourage that. It shouldn't be the most important thing about us. Even at the very end, it shouldn't be the most important thing about us. I live in a complex, a Housing 21 complex, where I have an independent flat, but there's also a lot of community life as well. And what I learned from a woman who lived here, who was very far on in dementia, is that no matter how near to the end you are, you can still add an awful lot to community life. Because Lillian is my inspiration. She was a little Geordie lassie who, even at the end of her dementia, was still the most loved person here in the complex, simply because she was still who she was. And that face that came up for a kiss, the gales of laughter when something amused her, her insistence on being in the front anytime a photographer was around, gave us so much joy. We still have so much to offer when we have dementia. And we need to make this very plain, maybe not for ourselves, but other people need to say it for us.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila. See, I told you they were both great speakers. And I've just realised we're an all-female panel, girls. Have you noticed that? We'll see what the opinions are maybe at the end. Nigel, have you got something?
There's a question here from Shirley Gray for Martina. May I ask, did you find alternative work, Martina? I can partially answer that because I speak to Martina on Saturdays and Sundays, and on Saturdays at a Saturday social. And you've grown a lot of tomatoes this year, have you not?
Absolutely. No, I haven't found alternative work because somebody said, well, why can't you go and stack tins in a supermarket? So I said, well, the problem is with PCA, I said, is you might see a row of a tin of beans, and all I see is a row of blur. So, you know, just imagine how frustrated you get when you walk around a supermarket and you find that they've moved everything. Or can you just imagine how frustrated you'd get if you found beans mixed up with peas and flowers and beetroot and onions and everything else. So that's part of why what I do is I have taught myself to really, really concentrate on what I know I can do and I can do well and what I can put my energies into.
Yeah, I guess somebody spent all 50 minutes yesterday looking for his headphones, only to walk past the mirror and realize he was wearing them. PCA is a gift that never stops giving. It's giving, does it? There's lots of messages, lots of messages here from people for you, Sheila. Hilary saying, "Wonderful as ever, my dear friend. Good to see and hear from you." Thank you so much, Sheila, for your passion and your continuing to support others. Rebecca says, "Thank you so much, Sheila, for your passion." I've just read that one out. From Sarah Jones again, "Thank you for sharing with us, really helps in our roles to support others." Wow, thanks so much for your honesty. That's from Shirley Gray. Carol Etherington, some very inspirational. Thank you for all talking, and a general message to all you ladies. Very empowering and very powerful things. Wonderful to hear from you women. That's from, oh, it's gone. But it's that's the kind of support. There's lots of love out there for you ladies. Lots of love.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Yeah, I've just had a quick look in the chat box and there is lots of love. And Kelly Chable says, "Thank you, Sheila. I agree, having dementia does not define who you are." And there's still that stigma attached to the word dementia, isn't there?
Mm.
And when Martina said about, you know, sometimes she just see the tins as blurs, the thing is that we get good days and we get bad days.
Yeah.
So if we do take on employment, it might be a bad day, that the day that we're meant to be working and we're not able to go. So employers don't understand that. But I don't know about you, but I watch The Restaurant That Makes Mistakes with people living with dementia. And I tell you, they could do wonders, and we all can. It's just that people don't see that. And we need to look at the qualities that we do have. And I just want to say a few things from my perspective. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is how I felt when I received my dementia diagnosis. Just to say briefly, in July 2016, when I was 60, I was giving my age away now, I received a diagnosis of early onset vascular dementia. And I was working full time at that point. I had been a police officer for 30 years, and I retired from the police in 2008. And I'd always been good at multitasking. In 2018, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And then in 2020, I was diagnosed with dementia with Lewy body. So each time it's like this bolt, you know, this bolt comes out and hits you in the face. And I can remember Martina said this as well, is that when she had her diagnosis, it was somewhat a relief. And it was for me a little bit, because I thought I was going mad. Mm. And I thought, I'd lost my marbles, is the expression that used. But when I received my diagnosis, I went to the elderly care assessment unit when I was 60, thinking I was going there for an assessment. So I went on my own, and it was there that I received this diagnosis of early onset vascular dementia. And I can remember hearing the word dementia. And after that, I can't remember what the consultant said to me, although he said he had explained everything to me. Just want to share with you some of the feelings that I felt after my diagnosis, because I don't think we think about the feelings. I was feeling scared, lonely, isolated, frightened, emotional, frustrated, useless, lost. I became depressed. It was difficult to explain to people what was going on in my head when I didn't know myself. I didn't want to socialize, and I became a prisoner in my own home. And that lasted for 3 months. And I couldn't talk to people without bursting into tears. And in that 3-month period of having my diagnosis, I also lost my job. And I was working for a big government organization. And I had been off on the sick because I'd had some minor strokes. And I had extreme fatigue from that and some cognitive problems. So when I tried to go back to work, I had to fight to get back to work. They said they'd take me back on restricted hours. And as soon as I went back to work, they said, well, they wanted to dismiss me. And I said, I've never been dismissed from any job, and you're not going to dismiss me. So they then decided in their wisdom that they would put me on a disciplinary process. Why? I don't know, because I hadn't done anything wrong. So I can remember just going into my emails and not remembering how to access my emails and other computer things that I was accessing day in and day out before that. And somebody would show me, and then 10 minutes later, again, I couldn't remember how to get into my emails. And then I had a letter at my home address to say that I'd gone through phase 1 of the disciplinary process in work. And I'd had a discussion with my line manager. This hadn't happened. I wasn't even in work on the day that this was supposedly have happened. So because I'd been so anxious and depressed, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, I can't go into work when they're telling lies about me. So I went on the sick with work-related stress. And for the first time in my life, I got the union on board. And cut a long story short, against my wishes, I was ill health retired. So in a 3-month period, I had my diagnosis, lost my job, And as Martina said, I also lost friends. And I couldn't understand why. Because as Martina and Sheila will say, is that sometimes I want to stand up and shout from the rooftops and say, I'm still me. I'm still the same person today as I was the day before my diagnosis. And I think sometimes you mention the word dementia and automatically people jump to end stage dementia. And they forget that there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And thankfully, I've had my diagnosis 6 years, and I remember being given an information leaflet which said that average lifespan after having a diagnosis of early onset vascular dementia was 5 years. 6 years later, I'm still here, and I'm still at the early stages. And I can remember sitting at home when I went through this period of depression and anxiety, and I thought, a bit like Martina, I've always been a half full cup type of person, and I know Sheila is like that too. And I thought, you have a choice here. You can either sit at home and you can watch daytime television and vegetate, or you can do something with what you've got left of your life. We all had lives before we had dementia. We've probably all had a number of jobs. And I know with Sheila was a counsellor, and she gives some wonderful stories, which I might tap into in a little while with you, Sheila. But we all had lives before dementia. And as Martina said, I've got no children. I haven't got anyone other than my partner to rely on to maybe take care of me when that time comes. So I decided I would do something about trying to do something with the rest of my life. And I can remember ringing Alzheimer's Society. And that same day, they sent people around to talk to me and to answer some of the questions. I had hundreds of questions rolling around in my head, but nobody to answer them. I wasn't referred to any follow-on services. I wasn't given any information. And it was exactly the same when in 2020, when I had my Lewy body dementia diagnosis. Nothing was explained to me. I wasn't given any information. And I can remember the consultant saying to me, you've possibly got Lewy body dementia. And I said, what do you mean possibly? Do I or don't I have Lewy body dementia? And she said, it can only be confirmed on autopsy. And I piped up straight away and I said, well, I'm not ready for that yet. And many of you will have known Robin Williams, and he committed suicide. And he had Lewy body dementia. And I wonder often, if he'd received his diagnosis, would he still be with us today? And people forget about the anxiety and the depression that seems to go hand in hand with dementia. And I don't sleep very well. And I suffer with restless legs. And every evening and night, I have these awful, painful, restless legs. And I'd like to also say that dementia is not all about memory. And people think it is. They forget about the cognitive issues that we have. I have problems with noise levels. And if I'm in a room with lots of people talking, my concentration goes completely. I've lost my sense of taste and smell. I have problems with my balance, and I can't walk very far now. And people don't even think about these things. But I decided that I would speak out about my dementia, because if I can stop one person having to go through some of the problems that I went through, it'll be worthwhile. And if I can raise awareness about dementia and explain more about dementia, it's worth it for me. And I can remember when I first knew that there was, all I could say was there's something not right in my head. And as I said, I thought I was going mad. And I went to my GP and told her some of these things. And I told her that one morning when I got up, I couldn't remember how to get dressed. And my GP turned to me and she said, I'm here for your physical health, not your emotional health. And I left there in tears. Your GP is meant to be your first port of call. So what do you do? Who do you turn to? And I'm going to ask a few questions of Martina and Sheila. But Tessa Gutteridge, I know that you're in the audience. And Tessa is a program director for Dementia UK. And as part of the young onset dementia. So Tessa, if you could just mention in the chat box whether you'd be prepared just to come and join the panel briefly, just to tell us a little bit about the Young Dementia Network, that would be good. But Martina, as you spoke first, have you got anything else that you'd like to add in view of some of the things that I've said? You're on mute, Martina.
Thank you. One of the things that did happen when you were talking about people understanding is I had the really, really unfortunate experience of, you know, we have to look at benefits here and we have to say the B word. And I was fortunate that because of the impact of form filling and stuff like that, Age UK came along with me and held my hand at the local job centre. And I sat before somebody who was 19 or 20, and Karen from Age UK said, it's not like it used to be in the old days, because I've never claimed anything in my life. I've been working since I was 16. And she said, you don't have to worry, it'll be all right. And I sat before this person and she said, well, have you got the diagnosis from your consultant, et cetera, et cetera. I handed them over. And she asked me something and I said, well, can Karen answer for me, please? Because I just can't think. It's a situation. I just can't think. And she said, no, you've got to answer for yourself. And I said, I've got a dementia diagnosis. And she said, well, you're still going to have to answer for yourself. And then I said, she said, when was the last time you worked? I said, well, I've worked all my life until recently. And she said, well, what you're going to have to do now, and she put her hands on her hips, and she actually said to me, when you see your job coach, if you don't do everything the job coach tells you to do, we are going to sanction you and we are going to stop part of your payments. Excuse me. There was no compassion. There was no understanding. I felt like a piece of meat being processed. And Karen, who was with me, ended the conversation. And what the young lady didn't realise was that Karen had actually worked with all of the senior managers there and went and saw somebody who was horrified. And she actually said, I will deal with this. This should never happen to anybody, let alone somebody that's actually got a dementia diagnosis. And we all feel that anybody with a dementia diagnosis shouldn't be put through this process of having to go to a job centre and have a job coach. And I think, unfortunately, because dementia is still perceived as a part of the ageing process, you know, people like us, people with young onset, you're absolutely right. Well, you can speak, you're quite eloquent, you can still tell jokes. You can't have dementia. Yes, I've seen the evidence.
Thank you, Martina. And the other thing we get is you don't look like you've got dementia. Well, yeah. I'm not sure what dementia looks like. Tessa's just joined us, and I'll ask Tessa to speak in a moment. But Sheila, have you got anything that you'd like to add to what's been said?
Yes, the hairs on my arms stood up when I heard Martina say that she knew people who'd had no support from their family, because I realised how lucky I am that I've had so much family support. I know that I wouldn't be as well as I am, as able as I am, without what they've given me. I have a granddaughter who's now a sophisticated 14-year-old, but she couldn't say Alzheimer's. Kristen's smiling because she knows this. She couldn't say Alzheimer's when I was first diagnosed, and she named it Nanny's got fizzy hammers. And in my family, that's what we call it. And I think fizzy hammers is a much better description of what it's like than Alzheimer's. But that's the way it's been. There's been laughter and support right from the beginning, and I'm so blessed with them, and I'm very aware that I'm so lucky, because so many people don't have that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sheila, and I think that some family members are in denial of their loved ones having dementia. And my dad had Alzheimer's disease, And when I was 60 and I got diagnosed, and I told my brother and sister, and they said, you can't possibly have got dementia. You're normal. And I gave them information leaflets. I don't know if they read them, but they would never accept that I had dementia. And one other quick point I was going to make was about when you're of working age and you lose your job through no fault of your own, and you go to claim benefits. And in my case, it was ESA, Employment Support Allowance, and PIP, which is Personal Independent Payment. And I went to the interview for the Employment Support Allowance, and I scored 0 points, and you had to score 15 points to be eligible for Employment Support Allowance. And they said the reason that I didn't score any points, even though I had a dementia diagnosis, was because I'd gone to the appointment on my own, I'd driven there, and I'd had a holiday that year. Those are crazy answers. And cut a long story short, I took them to tribunal, and I was fortunate to have somebody from Alzheimer's Society alongside me and my partner when I went to tribunal. And the tribunal was heard before a judge and a doctor. And I went from scoring 0 points to scoring 30 points. But how many people living with dementia and would not be able to go through that tribunal process? And I think it's about time that, you know, once somebody gets a dementia diagnosis, that they automatically get the benefits that they're entitled to. But maybe that's another story. Tessa, thank you so much for joining us. I asked Tessa to join us because I hope I get this right. Tessa Guttridge is the Programme Director at Dementia UK and Young Onset Dementia. And she is also a lead in the Young Dementia Network. So Tessa, I just wondered if you could perhaps give some pointers to the people who might be listening, who are either working with or have young onset dementia. And thank you for agreeing to come on the panel.
That's fine. Thank you for welcoming me, and the contributions from each of you have been just amazing this morning. So thank you very much for that. I think it's really important to base ourselves when we're working with young onset dementia into the actual reality of, so listening to you makes such a huge difference to us all who are working in the field. So thank you. You wanted to know a little bit about Young Dementia Network, and we're an influencing, collaborative community, really, of people with young onset dementia, family members, professionals who work in the field. And we set up 4 or 5 years ago in order to really campaign and press for better services for people with young onset dementia. So whether working or not, whether in whatever situation, living alone, living as part of a family, whatever your circumstances, we wanted to press for better services wherever you might live as well, because I'm sure that you're aware of how inequitable the services are across UK and across each of the countries of the UK. So that's very much what we're about, and we identify the different impact for younger people, and then we work with that in order to try and press for change at a policy level, at a practice level. Working as part of Dementia UK, obviously we want to be able to offer care and support for people with young onset dementia that actually recognises all of those differences that you've talked about yourselves in terms of the impact on a stage of life where you've still got absolutely plenty still to do. So that's the work of the network, really. And I think there's about 4,500 of us so far. We would very much welcome new members, and our campaign, our first campaign that's about to that we're in planning is around diagnosis and improving the experience of diagnosis. And I know we've reached out to 3 nations dementia working groups, so I'm hoping that we'll be contacting you more about to find out about your experiences. Yeah,
Thank you ever so much, Tessa. Somebody has put the link for the Young Onset Dementia Network in the chat box. Sorry, Catherine Keeley has put the link in there. And Kate Fallows from Dementia UK quite rightly said that the stuff that I read out in the beginning is actually from the Dementia UK network. So if you want more information, you can find it there. And I think that this coming together, you know, all of us, we need support. And it is very much a case of a postcode lottery, depending on where you live as to what you get. But if you join organisations like the Young Dementia Network, you get all the support that you need. And there's lots of other organisations out there. Of course, there's Alzheimer's Society, there's Dementia UK. And Dementia UK, if you ring their helpline, it's Admiral nurses who specialise in dementia that take the calls. And they're there not just for the person living with dementia, they're there for the whole family. Because we all know that if we get a diagnosis of dementia, our friends and our family also get that diagnosis of dementia. And it's not easy sometimes, is it? Because I used to be the most placid person in the world. But I know now sometimes, as we used to say in words, I could get my hair off, which means I get a bit cross. But sometimes I'm cross at myself and I'm cross at the things I can no longer do. And I can't multitask anymore. And I have to keep writing things down. I have to keep giving myself tips. But there are ways that we can work with our dementia. And it's just about finding ways around what works best for us. And there are lots of tips and hints that we can all give. But peer support is, I feel, is really important. And in the area that I live in Eastbourne, there really are no peer support services. So I've set up a peer support group for the people that live local to me so that we can chat and we can laugh together, we cry together. And we share tips and hints and things like that. And our Saturday and Sunday socials do that as well. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in joining those, we have a good chat. Nigel chairs them. So Nigel, do you have anything to add?
Well, no, first off, ladies, I mean, there's a lot of love out there for you, all of you. You as well, Tessa, since you've joined, you've got a smattering of love from the message boards.
Oh, welcome.
So sure is these harsh times. It's generally the fact that it's an all-female panel. I think that's slightly different. Really is slightly different, and we tend to have a different flavour when you ladies get together, and or you know, that's really good. But I think the main concern is the fragmented way that pre and post diagnostic services are developed, and the different experiences from employers. Hilary says that she's had two wonderful employers who supported her during the diagnosis. This wasn't Chris's. This wasn't Chris's experience, and this wasn't Martina's experience, particularly when it went to the job clubs. And as the thing I've always said is unique about young onset is that onset at dementia at any age is disempowering and dreadful, but at working age it's doubly so, because it affects, particularly if you've got school-age children, you're in a relationship and you're the main wage earner, it has an immediate effect on you, which I think there is no pill to cure. But generally, I think that people have been so grateful for you sharing experiences. And I just, Michael Hughes says, thank you so much for your time to tell your story. More people needed to see this and see what it's like. Sheena Ogilvie, Chris, it was very open and heartfelt. Without you ladies and others sharing your stories, I wouldn't have the tools to do my job. From Hiba Kadir, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. It's very inspiring. Keep positive. You are doing great. What
Thank
more
you.
ladies to see? Fantastic, ladies. What a webinar.
Thank you, Nigel. I just wanted to add something about, I know it was mentioned about when we get our dementia diagnosis, it's always such a negative experience. You've got dementia, get your affairs in order. And nearly everybody I've spoken to has said that. And a few months ago, I gave a talk to the top doctors in Lewy body dementia. And I said to them, please, can you give us some hope when you give us our dementia diagnosis? Don't just say you've got dementia, get your affairs in order. It's nice to know that we can still do things. And could you not say to us, there are some things you may not be able to do, but there's lots of things that you still will be able to do. And that gives us some hope, because I felt hopeless and useless when I had my dementia diagnosis. And now from the talks that I give and the people that I speak to, I've got a sense of purpose back in my life. And I no longer feel hopeless and useless. I feel hopeful and useful. So, you know, just try and think that there are still things that you can do. We're coming very, sorry, Sheila, go ahead.
I was going to say this thing about receiving diagnosis. I've been with someone when they had a diagnosis of cancer, and they were immediately, there was a nurse afterwards that she could go and speak to, and was given numbers. The way our diagnosis is delivered by most specialists is absolutely appalling. And I think it's something that really needs addressing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. What we have spoken about when I've spoken with other people living with dementia is when somebody gets a diagnosis, why can't they be put in touch with people like Martina, Sheila, myself, and speak to people who have already had that diagnosis, so we can give them some positivity and some hope and be alongside them to answer some of the questions that they have. So it may come about, it may not. So all that's left for me to say is thank you so much to all the panelists and also Tessa for who presented this morning. Thank you for I can never say this word, participating in our panel on dementia at a working age. And please, if you have a CME who'd like to be considered for a webinar, or you'd like to be a panelist on one of our webinars, please get in touch. I'd just like to remind you before you go that our next webinar is on Friday, the 23rd of March. And it's one that we've slipped in because it's, is it Alzheimer's, World Alzheimer's Dementia Awareness? Anyway, the one on Friday is 2 hours, and it's between, sorry, excuse me, looking at my notes, 11 and 1 p.m. And it's called The World Turned Upside Down. And it will be a special 2-hour session. And it's going to be showcasing the launch of a film, which is called The World Turned Upside Down. It's part of the Ideal Research project. And initially, it was a play that was staged in Exeter in January of this year. And this film shows the performances and the process it took to create it. The film shows the learning perspective and thoughts of the actors, audience members, and people affected by dementia who advised and influenced the play. It's a really interesting watch, and we're going to be discussing points about that. I think I'm right in saying that the people who played in the film, people living with dementia, were actors. So I think we should perhaps challenge them and just say, get actual people living with dementia to play themselves. Who knows? But we'd love you to join us for that on Friday between 11 and 1 o'clock. And it's now 12 o'clock. So thank you, everybody, very, very much. And it's been a pleasure chairing this session. And thank you for the Q&As, Nigel. So take care, everybody. And we'll see you soon. If the panelists can just stay on, and Tessa, if you have to go, that's fine. And we'll have a quick